University of Pennsylvania. Let me first introduce him very briefly. Professor Guobin Yang is an associate professor of sociology and communication at the Amberg School for Communication and Department of Sociology at the UPenn. His research area covers digital media and critical social theory, global communication, social movements, activist media, cultural sociology, and media and politics in China. He is the author of The Power of the Internet in China, Citizen Activism Online, Columbia University Press, 2009. That was a very popular book. The Red Guard Generation and Political Activism in China, again, Columbia University Press this year, and Dragon Carving and Literacy Mind, published in Beijing in 2003. He is the editor of China's Contested Internet, published in 2015, The Internet, Social Media, and Changing China in 2016, and Re-Invasion, the Chinese Revolution, that is in 2007. He co-edits the new Sage journal, Communication and the Public. Last but not least, when Professor Yang was a professor here, he brought his students to the library very often, and he brought us to his classroom. And that might be one reason that so many students from Barnard come here for studies, very often for thesis. Now, Professor Yang, please.
Thank you so much, Chengzhi. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really delighted to have this opportunity to talk about the Cultural Revolution. But I think of this as some sort of a pilgrimage to pay my gratitude to all the great scholars and the wonderful students here at Columbia and Barnard who helped me tremendously in my own research, teaching, and writing. The book that was published earlier this year, much of the research was done in the basement, right in this building. The Red Guard newspaper collections, I went through all of them. I studied all of them. And as well as all these books on the Cultural Revolution in many, many shelves. I'm sure the shelves have expanded. But they were invaluable resources. And when materials were not available, Chengzhi would help me to get hold of them, including electronic resources and so on. So that's why I was excited to have this opportunity, and I'm thinking of this as a pilgrimage to pay my respects and gratitude to our colleagues here in the library, in the Weatherhead East Asian Institute, and in the Department of East Asian Languages and Cultures. I won't say all the names, many of them. And also I would like to thank the Weatherhead East Asian Institute for including my book in the Weatherhead, it's called Weatherhead East Asian Studies series. And you are the editor, right? Yeah. Thank you, thank you. I know you personally asked, are you done with the book? It's taken a long time.
We're all anxious.
Thank you. I've been waiting for the 50th anniversary of the Cultural Revolution. Anyway, so the film we have just seen upstairs and the posters around, on exhibition here, I think show just how important culture was to the Chinese Cultural Revolution. This should not come as a surprise to anyone familiar with the history of the Chinese Communist Revolution in the 20th century. What is surprising is that this revolutionary culture is almost entirely missing, very much missing, I would say, if not entirely missing, from the mainstream dominant social science explanations of Red Guard factionalism and violence. And that is puzzling because we know that there is culture even in the name of this historical event. It is called the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution. And we know that Mao himself emphasized the importance of revolutionary culture. And the quotations from the Little Red Book, there is a specific section on revolution, arts and culture, reportedly was influential on the American New Left. I was also reading a lot about the American New Left and their own publications, and Mao's quotations on revolutionary culture specifically influenced the American New Left. That's why I thought it's puzzling that we are not taking more seriously the role of culture in understanding the kind of behavior that we saw in the film, right? I think we saw a lot of culture. We saw posters, we saw, in the streets, in the bedrooms, we saw Mao's Little Red Book. So what I try to do today and what I try to do in my book is to highlight the role of culture, especially revolutionary culture, in understanding Red Guard behavior. Specifically, violence. Factional violence has been a main focus of sociological analysis for the past several decades. Now, it might appear that the revolutionary culture, as much as the violence of the Red Guard, is a thing of the past. It was 50 years ago. But I think today's world is no less violent than the 1960s. And yet studies of contemporary violence, like studies of Red Guard violence, also lack a theory of the role of culture. So I also have a hope that this study of the Red Guard movement can offer some lessons for today as well, for understanding the various kinds of violence that's happening all over the world today. I'm not sure whether I have time. If there's time, I would also try to talk a little bit about the politics of history and the memory. So to begin with violence, I think as I mentioned, there is a lot of focus on the study of Red Guard violence, but I think it's also in order to fully understand violence, it's necessary to understand two other forms of Red Guard behavior. One is what I refer to as aestheticism. Aestheticism is a form of violence on the self. And I'll give examples. The other form I want to talk about is dissent. That there are some studies, but not much, of the kind of dissent, radical or heretical ideas that appeared in the middle of the Red Guard movement. And some of the proponents of these ideas got into serious trouble, were put into prison for 10 years, and even sentenced to death. So I have two things to talk about: violence, aestheticism, and dissent. They haven't been studied together, but I think they were three aspects of the same thing. And therefore, studying them together helps to better understand violence. My basic argument is that all three forms of Red Guard behavior were revolutionary performances. They were performances to prove who were the true revolutionaries. By analyzing how revolutionary culture provided the scripts of these performances, I want to highlight again the role of ideas, culture, ideology, values in collective violence. And I have a caveat just to say that I'm not saying that these performances had nothing to do with self-interest. We heard a little bit about self-interest in the film. But that the interest was not material, but rather political, and interest-based conflicts often were wrapped in the powerful myth of revolutionary struggle. So the first type of behavior, let me talk briefly about the performance of aestheticism. The road to violence was gradual, but signs of it began to appear early on in the various forms of aesthetic practices among student Red Guards in Beijing and in other cities. Youth competed with one another to display their revolutionary fervor by seeking their own self-imposed austerities, aesthetic practices on the body and on the soul. Physical aestheticism took many forms. For example, in the disciplining of the clothes one wore, the way one walked or talked, one's hairstyles, gestures, and postures. There was a tendency toward uniformity. For instance, the Red Guard uniform, the militant voice, the shouting of slogans, the writing of wall posters. Amid such uniformity, innovations tended to be those which introduced more austerities. The following excerpt, taken from the recollections of a former Red Guard, illustrates such self-imposed aestheticism. Quote, this is a quotation from a retrospective, personal memory. Many girls in my class, in order to show they were real revolutionaries, cut their hair very, very short, and they walked barefooted. This was in Beijing. They required other students to do the same. So we all walked barefooted in the streets of Beijing. It was summer, and the sun melted the road. The asphalt stuck to our feet, so black we could not wash it off. I could not bear walking on my bare feet, so I asked my dad to make a pair of straw sandals for me. I walked in the streets of Beijing in a pair of straw sandals across the Tiananmen Square and into my school. So this is just one example of many of what I think of as a form of self-violence, violence on the self, or aesthetic practice. And that was in August 1966. Gradually, we saw, again in the film, people were taking long marches, right? Taking long marches to the sacred sites of revolution, for instance, Yan'an, Jinggangshan, on revolutionary pilgrimages. So by October 1966, another form of aesthetics practice appeared. The so-called long marches many Red Guards made to the sacred sites of the Chinese Revolution. These were literally long marches that tested the stamina and the revolutionary will of the youth. Sometimes they were offered transportation vehicles. They refused. We wanted to walk 1,000 li. I have a few examples. The November issue of a Red Guard newspaper in Guangzhou has stories about a series of these kind of long marches around the country. For example, November 16th, this quote, more than 10 high school students from the 6th middle school of Zibo City, Shandong province, came into a cold front, but they made their way to their destination, the capital city, Beijing. The same day, November 16th, Communist Party leaders in Beijing received more than 30 long march teams of a total number of 430 people who had walked to Beijing. The average age was about 20. The youngest was 14, and 89 of them were females. The longest distance covered among these teams was over 1,000 kilometers in a matter of 44 days. So again, it's a kind of aesthetic practice that they sought eagerly in order to demonstrate their revolutionary will. So this is what I refer to as a kind of aestheticism. Second example is about the performance of violence, which we are more familiar with because there are, we read a lot about this. There are films about this, and there are factional battles all around the country. So in my book, the first chapter is a case study of the factional warfare in the city of Chongqing, which was among the worst, partly because there were military factories there, and the Red Guards and rebels were able to seize weapons, so they were engaged in real warfare. So if you've been to Chongqing, you might have visited probably the only, at least the biggest Cultural Revolution cemetery in Chongqing, hidden in the park. It took me a while to try to find it, but then I had a guide who helped me to find it. In that cemetery alone were buried over 400 young people who died in the factional battles. Now, Cultural Revolution caused all kinds of death and many deaths, And I'm talking only about death caused by factional battles, red guards and rebels fighting against each other. And the official statistics for this, official numbers for Chongqing was 1,200 died in factional battles. And I talked to people who do research on this in Chongqing, and I think people generally think this is a conservative estimate. The actual number could be bigger. We know that one cemetery alone buried more than 400, and there were other cemeteries which were bulldozed after the Cultural Revolution. So after each battle, the main factions were often engaged in publicity and propaganda, attacking the opponents and commemorating its own death through its own papers, wall posters, loudspeakers. The Red Guard newspapers collected here have almost a complete run of one of the major Red Guard newspapers from Chongqing and from Chengdu as well. And if you read those papers, you will see pictures, photographs of people who were killed. But they celebrated these as martyrs, and they were conferred with martyr status. The reports also often contain descriptions, very visceral descriptions of battle scenes. And these battle scenes, when I read them, that's what I read out of them. But also other people also get the same. That their descriptions of the battle scenes are very similar, extremely similar to those in Chinese war films. That it's hard not to see that these factional battles were mimetic. Red Guard factional warfare, my argument, is that it was an enactment of an imagined revolution based on scripts familiar to this youth. Life, in this case, was imitating art. Here is an example. There are many examples again. An example of one from one person who was the chief editor of the major Red Guard newspaper in Chongqing. And he was talking about one particular battle. And here's my translation of the original Chinese. I walked over to the Jiangbei District Party Committee compound to check out the best location for positioning the 12.7 mm machine gun. They were using real weapons, as I mentioned. I chose a little hill on the right side. It was next to the auditorium. I set up the tripod next to the auditorium and placed the machine gun properly. I held the machine gun with my two hands. At this point, the shining image of the hero, Shapayev, shooting machine guns in the Soviet movie Shapayev appeared in my mind. This kind of stories appear very often, that in battle scenes, in the middle of battle scenes, especially during very critical moments, this kind of images flashed across their minds from a movie, from a book they have read, from a song they are familiar with. So that's what I mean, life was imitating art. That's the second aspect, performance. The third one was dissent. Ideas of dissent were not as common as factional violence, but were still an integral part of the Red Guard movement. They almost always appeared in the middle of factional warfare and were published in the Red Guard press. There are many of them. Some of the more radical ones, probably the most radical one, which is probably also the most familiar to us, is essay by Yang Xiguang, 18-year-old high school student from Changsha. And the title of the essay is Whither China? And when it came out, it was translated into English, I think celebrated by the Western New Left as the manifesto of the Chinese New Left. And what the main ideas was that in China, a red capitalist class had appeared among the high top leaders, party leaders, and in order to make a real revolution, and we are making a real revolution, we needed to overthrow the state apparatus, and we needed to establish a new political party. So these were extremely radical ideas. Yang Xiguang was put in prison for 10 years. So later on, after economic reform, he moved to Australia, some of you know, changed his name to Yang Xiaokai, became a famous economist. These ideas did not originally appear as dissent, so this is my argument, but rather as the efforts of sincere believers to theorize the Cultural Revolution. They were the products of the conscious imitation of what their authors, like Yang Xiguang and many others, imagined orthodox Marxists would do in these contexts. In their imagination, these young authors were playing the role of revolutionary theoreticians, personified by Marx, Engels, Lenin, and Mao, and they love to think of themselves in that lineage. They were performing the revolution theoretically, just as their comrades were doing the same practically in actual physical fighting. Jonathan Onga, sociologist, China scholar in Australia, has studied Yang Xiguang's case very deeply and carefully, and published a very long essay about Yang Xiguang's intellectual trajectory. I will just cite one passage from his article to give a sense about how these young people really were imagining themselves. They were passionate to become theoreticians, to theorists of revolution. So, quote, on one hand, Yang Xiguang was seeking out such complaints at the bottom of society, while on the other, he was searching feverishly for explanations and idealistically for alternative ways of organizing society that would avoid inequalities and repressive hierarchy. In particular, he and two other students of like mind ruminated over Lenin's State and Revolution and discussed the 1966 Cultural Revolution articles commemorating the 95th anniversary of the Paris Commune. The Paris Commune, State and Revolution, Lenin's State Revolution, Marxist classic, civil war in France. A lot of these young people memorized these classics, literally, word for word. And they wanted to write the same kind of theoretical works. Yang Xiguang's Whither China and other articles, there's one that is called Report on the Condition of Youth in Changsha, which, as you can tell, is a clear imitation of Mao's report of the investigation of the conditions of the peasants in Hunan. And even the language and rhetoric, he used very similar. He cited Mao he didn't have to say that quotation because everybody would know. But again, I think good example of how they were passionately wanted to apply Marxist theory to the analysis of Chinese reality, but at the same time really imitating Mao, Marx, Lenin, and other revolutionary theorists. So there was in Yang Xiguang and other self-designated young theoreticians of the time a confidence and audacity that was both the result of the idealistic education of the Red Guard generation and a mark of the times. I think we see sort of similar tendencies among some of the American New Left in '68. As based on my reading, for instance, of Professor Todd Gillen's work of the '60s, I get a sense there are similar aspirations among American radical students. Another, the film we just saw was we saw quite a bit of film footage on the East Lake in Donghu, East Lake in Wuhan. That was a revolutionary lake that inspired a group of young radicals to start a self-study society and publish their essays in newspapers, and then they got cracked down, was arrested. The main person, Lu Lian, was arrested again, put in prison for 10 years. He wrote extremely moving memoir about his experiences as a Red Guard and as a radical theorist, and then his life, his 10 years of life in prison, published in Hong Kong. I wrote a book review for that, so I know that very well. And he talked about how they, you know, they were sort of taking walks along the East Lake and pondering about the future of the nation and the world. They were like the, you know, the darling of the not just Chinese Revolution but world revolution, full of optimism and idealism. But eventually, you know, of course, it was disillusionment. Okay. How much time do I have left? Yeah. Okay. Good. So these are three aspects of red guard behavior which are related in very important ways. But as I mentioned early on, that a lot of the focus of our research has been on red guard violence. But I think it's helpful to, in order to better understand violence, we also need to understand asceticism and dissent. Dissent as the unintended outcome of revolutionary theoretical action. So now I want to talk about, you know, what exactly was that revolutionary culture and why and how, why was it enacted? It didn't have to be enacted, right? So here are sort of a very rough list of what I think of the basic elements of this revolutionary culture. A revolutionary culture which was sacralized, which became sacred, or, you know, hallowed revolution culture. First, a revolutionary tradition that was sacralized in the forms of memorials, textbooks, festivals, and monuments, and so on. Second, a group of behavior models that was widely publicized for use to emulate. They were heroes in films, children's books, songs, music, and so on. So behavior models, we all know Lei Feng, but there are many other behavior models. And the young people were called upon to actively emulate these models. Third, a repertoire of revolutionary rhetoric and language which saturated the public sphere and became resources for political action. And one very good example, which I talk about quite a bit in the book, is the famous or notorious 9 polemics of the Chinese Communist Party against the Soviet Union, the Soviet revisionism, sometimes also translated as 9 commentaries, 九评, published in 1963 and 1964, a series of 9 lengthy essays directly orchestrated by Mao, but then written by the top theorists in the Communist Party. That series of essays were very influential for the generation, and I'll have an example to quote later on. And then finally, among the list of the elements of revolutionary culture, of course, there were Mao's hallowed instructions to the youth to be revolutionary successors. This was almost like a religious calling, and you know, the famous phrase is "Morning Sun," right, which has been made in the film. You young people are the hope of the country, right? You are like this, like the sun at 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning. I mean, English is not as powerful as Chinese language in this case. The Chinese language was kind of almost like has that kind of power of a religious incantation, I think, for a lot of these people. So here is let me see how many examples I have. A couple of examples just to show that this culture, of course, was official culture, but you know, people how this culture influenced the young people. One example. Well, my argument is they influenced these young people so profoundly that the culture almost became a part of their selves, became embodied, became a part, you know, you can physical sign. There's wonderful studies by two anthropologists, Arthur Kleiman and Joe Kleiman, published in 1990s about, you know, people's sickness, nausea, and these kind of bodily discomforts when they interview victims of the Cultural Revolution who had traumas and so on. And they found the kind of bodily discomforts they were suffering after the Cultural Revolution was a consequence of the mental trauma, all kinds of trauma they experienced in the Cultural Revolution. That's also a case of embodied memory. The physical, the culture became a part of yourself. So here's one example from one recollection. At that time, the author was a child. At that time, whenever summer holidays began and school was closed, I would be at home. Our doors and window were all open. Whenever the magnificent song "East is Red," which we just heard upstairs, started broadcasting, we would know it was 10 o'clock. So every morning at 10 o'clock, it started punctually. Gradually, the broadcasting became part of the body and flowed with the blood. During the holidays, when the factory was closed and the broadcasting stopped, it felt as if my body had some of its parts extracted. It felt hollow and lacking support. I think this is a really very visceral example of how that culture became a part of yourself. So every day, every morning, you listen to Dongfang Hong, East is Red at 10 o'clock. Someday suddenly disappeared, and you felt part of you was missing, right? Like hollow, and part of your body was extracted. So this is one example. There are many others which I won't have time to mention. But again, we can ask another question. Even though the ideas are powerful, even though they have powerfully become part of the individuals, it doesn't necessarily have to hold true that this culture would be enacted as if it would become a script for revolutionary performance. In order for that to take place, I talked about two kind of social conditions in the book, two critical social conditions which made it possible, which gave reality to these ideas, gave urgency to the sacred idea of revolutionary culture. The first condition, social condition, was that the Red Guard generation lived in the social world of enchantment and danger in the Cold War. So on one hand, there was a sense of enchantment for these children, these young people growing up, under the red flag, right? Under the red flag, singing some of the songs, very beautiful songs like "Flowers of the Nation," 祖国的花朵. It gave a sense of enchantment, gave them a sense of happiness, of glory, of pride about themselves and about the nation. But at the same time, they were also living in a world of danger, full of danger. It was the Cold War. The context was Cold War, right? So here is a quote about that sense of enchantment. And this is about the song "Flowers of the Nation," which is the title of my second chapter of the book, which was I think was the first children's film produced in PRC, 1955. So this was a recollection. This beautiful song referring to the "Flowers of the Nation" drifted over my childhood and teenage years. The picturesque view of the white pagoda in the Beihai Park in Beijing gave me boundless imagination. Whenever I go to a KTV, this was more than 10 years ago recollection, I cannot help but request this song. Whenever classmates hold gatherings and sing together, we often choose this song. Every time I listen to it or sing it, I'm so inspired that tears roll down my face. This was a person in his 50s remembering that song from his childhood year. Now the Cold War context, of course, was a context of fear, of danger, external threat, internal, enemies and so on, class enemies, spies from Chiang Kai-shek ruled Taiwan, right? Because the Taiwanese government at that time was still talking about taking back the mainland. So it was a lot of fear of that that's another source of fear. There was the danger of Soviet revisionism, which was broadcast over and over again in Chinese newspapers. And then into the 60s, there was the Vietnam War and Chinese support of the North Vietnam, and of course the Taiwan Strait crisis in the late 1950s, 1958. So all these, there's a long list. There's a lot of now revival of new Cold War studies about that period. Really gave a sense of really extreme, dangerous period of world history. At some moments, Nancy Tucker, in a book in 2012, I think the title is China Threat, basically shows that there was the possibility of nuclear war, right, at that time. So that's the social context in order to understand violence, the kind of revolutionary fervor, asceticism, violence on self, violence on others. Another context which I wanted to also emphasize was the process of the Cultural Revolution itself. That process was one of uncertainty and ambiguity. Mao supported the rebellion, of course, supported the young people, calling on youth to challenge authorities. There were constant flow of directives from top leaders, but directives very often are ambiguous, not very clear instructions. People generally thought a revolution was in the making. Young people were excited, but they did not know how to make a revolution. Under such circumstances, there was a strong need for self-proof. There was a strong need to perform yourself in order to show that you were the true revolutionary and not a counter-revolutionary, because there are always the risk of being labeled as a counter-revolutionary or reactionary, and that could have dire consequences for yourself and your families. The top leaders, I'm using sort of the language of drama, right? Performance, or here, the top leaders were like directors, but they were distal directors. They were in the distance, right? They were in Beijing, and then remote control. But ambiguous control. They offer ambiguous cues that really encouraged performance, encouraged the competition to prove yourself. And here is a relatively long quote. I think it's a very good example. So I'm going to read this passage. It's a speech by Tao Zhu, who initially was one of the leaders of the small cultural revolution small group. Again, the context was that all over the country, red guard organizations, rebels, had all kinds of difficulties, right? Local authorities cracking down on them. They were totally angry, grievances. So they marched to Beijing to seek petitions, and then to seek interviews, meetings with top leaders. And top leaders were spending a lot of time, including Zhou Enlai, spending often sleepless nights to meet these people, giving them instructions. This is one example by Tao Zhu. So the young people said, we are revolutionaries. Our rivals, our opponents, they are reactionary, right? So the question is about, Tao Zhu said, who is counter-revolutionary? Earlier, it refers to people from Taiwan or people with radio transmitters. Now, the masses want to do revolution. If you suppress revolution, you are counter-revolutionary. True revolutionaries, false revolutionaries, half revolutionaries, 1/3 revolutionaries, 1/4 revolutionaries, they all must be tested in this movement. Good people in the past may not necessarily still be good people. At present, there is more than one Red Guard organization in Beijing's schools. You can compare one with another to see who is red and who can be red all the way to the end. You cannot allow yourselves to organize but forbid others to do it. You cannot say you are true revolutionaries and they are fake. This is mass organizing. Their organizations may also be revolutionary. Maybe hold a revolutionary competition. Good ones will grow, bad ones will collapse. True or fake revolutionaries will be distinguished in revolutionary practice. This is direct encouragement for the students and young people to fight against each other. Because through fighting, they prove themselves through fighting. And what is the most powerful proof? It was to die at the cost of your life, right? You can prove yourself by sacrificing your life to the revolution. So I hope that that I've sort of given enough examples just to illustrate in what ways that how powerful that sacred revolution. First of all, that revolutionary culture was sacred, was sacralized, right, through systematic distribution, reception, and so on and so forth. How that became part of their identities, their selves, and then how those scripts, revolutionary scripts, became the scripts for various kinds of performances throughout the Red Guard movement from 1966 to 1968. I'm not saying there are not other important reasons. There are numerous studies, and there are complex conditions and circumstances. Sometimes local conflicts reflected local conditions, right? But I wanted to highlight the role of culture and ideology in all these three aspects of Red Guard behavior. So I sort of, I said I wanted to maybe briefly talk about the politics of history and memory, because that's one question I often get. People are interested in what's happening now, how do people remember the Cultural Revolution. So just a very quick sort of summary of a few points. So in the 50 years since its end, the Cultural Revolution has never been forgotten in China. But it is remembered selectively, and what is remembered depends on who does the remembering and when, and is highly contested. In broad terms, we can think of three: the 1980s, the 1990s, and then the 21st century. Three different historical periods. Each period had a different memory politics. The general features of Cultural Revolution memories in each period, in each decade, are significantly shaped by the politics of that time and the social conditions of the specific units of the Red Guard generation. As a result, contemporary memories of the Cultural Revolution are broken and fragmented. It's impossible to find, people remember things the same. You talk to different people have very different memories. To some extent, they have also fallen, however, along the lines of factional divisions formed during the Red Guard movement. This suggests that Deng Xiaoping's efforts to exorcise the ghost of factionalism in the political campaigns following the end of the Cultural Revolution were not entirely successful, and the factional conflicts of 1966 and 68 continue to haunt Chinese society and politics today. So the 1980s, very quickly, 1980s was a forward-looking period. The whole decade was forward-looking. A period of consolidating a new regime of post-Mao leadership and jump-starting the economic reform. And public memories of the Cultural Revolution at the time were condemnatory and negative, reflecting the rising fortunes of party leaders who had been persecuted in the Cultural Revolution, as well as general social discontent with the Cultural Revolution. The faction that emerged as victors of the Cultural Revolution, represented by Deng Xiaoping, and by conservative Red Guard organizations at the grassroots, dominated the narration of the history and memories of Mao and the Cultural Revolution. So most memory stories, in forms of literature, films, reported literature, they were told by intellectuals or party cadres who were victimized in the Cultural Revolution inside China. Of course, outside of China, there are a different genre of memoirs of exile, but I'm mainly focusing on China, inside China. The 1990s was a very different period. So reversing the cultural trends of the 1980s, the 1990s opened with a Mao fever and closed with a wave of Sandown youth nostalgia, making it a backward-looking decade. So 80s was forward-looking, 90s was backward-looking. In both these phenomena, strong nostalgic sentiments were expressed for certain aspects of the Cultural Revolution. So just a decade before, Shandong youth had protested for their right to return to the cities. So at the end of the Cultural Revolution, end of 70s, there were major Shandong youth protests in Beijing, Shanghai, and other cities, Yunnan, Kunming, of course. And so, they were protesting, they were fighting for their right to return to the cities. Both Mao fever and Shandong youth nostalgia in the 1990s reflected the social changes taking place at that time and their impact on the psyche of the Red Guard generation. The economic reform in the 1990s marked China's deeper entry into capitalism, the very target of the Cultural Revolution. The proliferation of Cultural Revolution memories was, in a way, a critical response to the social consequences of the marketization of the Chinese economy. So when I interviewed a lot of people at the end of the 1990s, and a lot of that was the first major wave of laying off workers from state-owned factories. And the people who were hit the hardest were members of the Red Guard generation, because their education and they couldn't compete with the younger. A lot of them were laid off, hit very hard. The Mao fever was somewhat different from the Zhiqing nostalgia. Zhiqing nostalgia was more of the bottom up. But Mao fever also has a government-sanctioned aspect, sometimes called Mao craze, Mao Re, as well as a non-official and spontaneous Mao cult, which was different from the Mao cult in the 1960s, although there might be some continuity. The government-sanctioned Mao craze culminated with the centenary of Mao's birth in 1993, which was observed nationally with the issuance of Mao commemorative coins and stamps, movies about his life, unveiling of his statue in his birthplace. Just 10 years before, early 1980s, statues of Mao were around the country were removed. Right now, we're building of new statues. And then Mao's portraits were being issued in huge numbers. In 1990, 22 million, more than 22 million Mao portraits were printed, of which 19 million was sold. I try to close, I think we're running out of time. 15 million Mao portraits were printed in 1991. And then government sponsorship of the Mao revival in the early 1990s, I think, reflected the political exigencies of the time. 89, the conservatives within the party challenged Deng Xiaoping's liberalization policies, and therefore there is a return to Maoist policies from the conservatives in the party. Finally, the 21st century, we have been seeing a second red culture revival, the first being in the 1990s. So the first 15 years of the 21st century was neither forward-looking nor backward-looking, but oriented to the present. The Chinese party state desperately tries to maintain social stability in a time of rising unrest. The women became the top priority. The wealthy middle class were preoccupied with consumerism, if not hedonism. The disadvantaged segments of the population found their voices online and in the streets. So under these conditions, party leaders promoted a new red culture. Making a mockery of the militant red culture in the 50s and 60s, this new red culture celebrates not violence or revolution, but harmony and stability. The official promotion of a red culture in the 2000s was paralleled by the appearance of an unofficial memory culture. Former rebels, for example, who were suppressed or scapegoated as the perpetrators of the violence by the post-Mao regime, began to tell their story in large numbers, sometimes online, sometimes published in Hong Kong, occasionally published here. There has appeared a informal network of Cultural Revolution folk researchers. They call themselves 民间文革研究者. This Ian Johnson from New York Times has written about this. There is a so-called underground online newsletter that published a lot of these stories. Insofar as the main supporters of the new red culture are the princelings and second generation reds, 就红二代, who are likely to be among the old red guards. This is a complicated background I didn't get to explain, right? The old red 老兵, the first contingent of red guards, later on called themselves 老兵, and they were mostly from children of elite cadre families. So the main supporters of the new red culture likely to come from second generation reds who are likely to be among the old red guards in the red guard movement. If that is true, then one might view the revival of red culture and the appearance of rebel memoirs as the factionalized memories of two rival camps of the red guard movement, the old guards and the rebels. So in that sense, the Cultural Revolution continues. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Yang. I'm not a good timekeeper, not because I am not, simply because the lecture is so exciting that I hesitated to give him any signal. But now it's good time for us to ask questions and have comments. Please.
Collect a few questions and then
I think
we'll collect a few and then respond, and then we'll collect a few more.
Okay, maybe
Just to save time.
three.
Yeah, you talk about the memory of the Cultural Revolution, but I was wondering whether you could comment on the forgetting of the Cultural Revolution. I mean, on the anniversary date, I don't think it was really noted in any official press. Maybe there was one thing in the People's Daily about it. It wasn't commemorated in the United States in any way by New Left or other kind of people who at the time supported it. It seems like it's basically, there's been a certain amnesia or maybe intentional amnesia about it. And people, I mean, your book is interesting because in general, my observation would be people don't really want to discuss it.
That's great. Second.
Okay, yeah, Professor Yang, your theory is useful to explain those active players like the Red Guard rebels. But the thing is,
Could you speak now?
yes, but the thing is, the majority of the people, we could see two or three of them didn't get involved in the Cultural Revolution. So how your theory could be useful to explain their actions? That's my question.
Third one, please.
Actually, in your speech, you have mentioned that Cultural Revolution has influenced the people very deeply. Actually, the current top leaders of China, they were the generation of red guard, some of them at least, or most of them are red guard generations. So, politically speaking, we are cultural. What kind of influence Cultural Revolution will have upon China's policy domestically and internationally?
All right, so let me quickly respond to the three questions. All are really important questions and all difficult to answer. Amnesia question. Whenever we talk about memory, we also assume that memories are selective. So people remember some things and forget other things. You're really talking about amnesia on the part of the party, right? The party state. I think you are following what's happening around the 50th anniversary as closely as I was. People's Daily, 2 o'clock in the morning on May 16th this year, published a small op-ed. Basically acknowledge that was acknowledgement that we haven't forgotten the Cultural Revolution and the chaos of the time. That was a time of total chaos. It should be forgotten. I think that's the message, right? I think was very interesting message. I think that really says a lot about why the party is not actively talking about this. It's very similar to Deng Xiaoping's approach. Deng Xiaoping basically said, which is totally, his policy is totally negate the Cultural Revolution, 全面否定. And then at a certain point, no more talk about the Cultural Revolution. At some point, we can talk about Cultural Revolution in broad terms, but not in very specific terms. I think the main thing is such a difficult history. Because even today, some of the rebels still thought that they were scapegoated, right? They were still, some of them still followers of Mao. Others, of course, the more liberals, they were still fighting. At Deng Xiaoping's time, Deng Xiaoping wanted to stop that so that we could move on. And I think that's totally understandable. That's a policy that was supported by a lot of people. I think the regime faces a time that's just as critical and difficult, as troublesome as Deng Xiaoping's time. And again, just the top priority is talk about stability within. To talk about the Cultural Revolution is not to talk about stability. I think that's really a main concern. Why they just want to totally avoid this. But the more interesting story for me as a sociologist is that, as I mentioned early on, the Cultural Revolution has never been forgotten by people who are involved in them, people who are victimized, people who participated in one way or another. And the stories, people tell their personal stories, numerous stories. I started collect data, my data in the 1990s. At that time, was still manageable. Nowadays, it's impossible to collect everything because they are appearing all over the web. Also people are newsletters. The one that Ian Johnson wrote about, one is called 昨天, the other is called 记忆, has been issued ever since 2008 to be making list. Tens of thousands of pages of, that's why I said, it hasn't been forgotten. And that generation now, at this point, a lot of them are retired. 10 years ago, maybe they were still worried. They didn't want to talk about this a lot. This could be politically sensitive, might cause trouble. A lot of them now are retired, and they are now more outspoken. So this is one quick. Your question about non-involvement, that's a very important question. Of course, in any social movement, political movement, there will be people who are not involved. And it's quite amazing, if you were watching the film just before this, the documentary film, we saw very rare kind of footage of everyday life, right? The remarkable thing about the Cultural Revolution was, while people were fighting fiercely in the streets, life was going on. Everyday life was going on. That's why I said that's why I said that the Red Guard movement, the Cultural Revolution, was like a show, was like a drama. The drama had to end. We still need holidays. I think something similar happened in France. People can protest any day of the weekdays, but no, you don't have rallies or demonstrations on weekend. We still want our weekend life. So that's one response. The more important thing is that this was a revolutionary competition. To try to exit was extremely dangerous and difficult. There are, of course, people who became 逍遥派, but you have to be in a particular situation to be able to do that. Not everybody can afford to just to try to, I'm not going to get involved anymore. You will become a counter-revolutionary, you'll become a reactionary. There's the social pressure. The political pressure was so powerful, it was very difficult. Having said that, I think it's still an important topic to study. Why 逍遥派? I haven't seen real studies about the 逍遥派. There's still, that's part of the story. The third question about how the Cultural Revolution is shaping today's policies is a big question, difficult to answer. I think in various ways, the Cultural Revolution and then 89 have always been, ever since, right, have always been major kind of, not part of the psyche of the leadership. You have, everything you do, have to think about Cultural Revolution, have to think about 1989. So in that sense, these political movements in earlier history cast a long shadow that's always there. And I think that's the kind of influence. It's very difficult really to study how concretely they are shaping policy. People have talked about how Andy has written about Xi, who is Xi, I think, cited the sources which I at that time I hadn't seen about the particular personalities of these leaders and how that may have a lot to do with their families, with their elite status, or that, you know. So I don't want to speak on behalf of Andy, but Andy will have a better answer than I can. But I think there's something you can say about how that kind of political experiences had influenced the personalities of these generations. One thing I noticed, this is again sort of anecdotal, it's not in my book, and something I admire when I talk with people who were involved from that generation. I'm always impressed by how eloquent they are. They can talk because they practice this a lot during the culture. The mass struggles, mass criticism. You have to be able to talk. They can talk. That's something. And sometimes, I think Xi Jinping. People generally think Xi Jinping is bolder than Hu Jintao. I think they are probably. Again, this is I don't want to generalize so much, but it's possible that kind of audacity in the revolutionary movements, in the political movement, may have some influence even today.
One last question, because we are running out of time. However, we have pretty long reception time. We can discuss more and ask Professor Yang more questions. Yes.
Do you notice anything in common with the netizen uprisings now and the good aspects of the Cultural Revolution?
Thank you for the question. So the question is whether there are interesting parallels or similarities between the kind of online protests today and the Cultural Revolution style protest. I think this is one thing I talked about. Second part of the book is about the kind of continuities of the Cultural Revolution in terms of style, in terms of tactics, in terms even of the language that is used by activists in later decades, from the democracy war to the 80s to the present. There is a continuity. That kind of political language continues to be invoked. To rebel is just 造反有理, right? People still use that language. Workers, students, and this is common online as well. A very recent incident, which has sometimes been compared to the Red Guard kind of behavior, is the so-called there's a recent cyber nationalism protest, right? In Chinese, it's called 第八出征.
Okay.
now we're in cyberspace. Yeah. So the cyberspace, Baidu, China's biggest search engine, has huge online forums in tens of millions of people. The biggest one, most popular one, is called 第八, the forum of the king, which is a nickname. This was the base for launching an attack by Chinese cyber nationalists against Taiwan's newly elected president, Tsai Ing-wen, on January the 20th this year. So they were able to jump the firewall, the Great Firewall, because normally you can't access Facebook now, right? But this time they crossed the wall in huge numbers, flooded Tsai Ing-wen's Facebook page with all kinds of Cultural Revolution style slogans, attacking and then, which is different, showing off mainland's, cuisine, natural beauties, history, citing Confucianism, Confucian sayings to shame the Taiwanese. The Red Guards would never do that because the Red Guards were attacking the Taiwanese. So these young cyber nationalists have been, they got a nickname called 小粉红, little pink. That is because the major online communities where they are active which is called 晋江文学城, Jingjiang Literary City. The background of that website is in pink. So The Economist, just a little while ago, published an article called "The East is Pink," which compares these little pinks to the red dot. But the image that The Economist uses is in red. And they were tweeting, so I tweeted back. I said, "You've got to take the pink seriously. Pink is not red. It's similar to red in some ways, but it's different from red. It's different in the sense that there are, even though some of the slogans are revolutionary, cultural revolution style slogans, a lot of their behavior is, people wouldn't be able to understand if you don't understand their gaming culture, their fandom culture, because that's what they do in everyday life. There are gamers, young girls. A lot of them are young girls. They are patriots, but they are different kind of patriots than regulars. They are not like followers of Xi at all. They are followers. They are followers of idols from the Korean TV drama. But the nation for them is like their idol. So in that kind of expedition, it's almost like they're fighting on behalf of their idol, and that's, I think, a very interesting difference. While at the same time, I think there are some similarities.
I'm very sorry to say we have to conclude this session now. However, Professor Yang's book is available here for sale, as well as signing by him. Let's give Professor Yang a round of applause. Don't go away, because as you have seen already, we have the exhibition started today. Now, let's start have our
Exhibition.
I think the remarks maker are here, so we just continue. Before I turn to Barbara Eichenbach, Associate University Librarian of Columbia University Libraries, I would like to introduce formally to show our seriousness. I think for the exhibition, you have seen some already. I welcome you to look at them very carefully. That is only part of our connections. And one important portion of it comes from Miss Judy Manton, Cultural Revolution Propaganda Art Connection. So some of them are displayed here. Besides, we include our own posters, books, and manuscripts you are going to see. I think some students came yesterday and today asked me lots of questions about this topic, as well as about the library resources already. I think the exhibition and the lecture and the film screening, and of course our daily library work too, that is indeed try to advance knowledge and inspire discovery. All those words are beautiful. However, they are part of the new strategic plans that Barbara, as well as East Asian Library Director and other leaders of the library are finalizing. So I'm happy to say that so many students have interest already in this topic and the library resources. But before I turn to Barbara, let me quickly read the bio of his. Barbara is the interim associate university librarian for collections and services. Previously, she led humanities and history division at Columbia University Libraries. She has also held leadership positions at the Yale University and J School before she joined Columbia. As art historian and librarian by training, she has research interests in information ethics, pedagogy, and libraries, digital humanities in libraries, and 20th century photography. Barbara, please.
Thank you very much. Brief. I don't want to keep you much from the reception, but dear guests and friends, on behalf of Ann Thornton, who is our university librarian and vice provost, who could not make it this evening, I would like to join the East Asian Library colleagues Jim Cheng and Chengzhi Wang again to warmly welcome you to this event. We also want to thank our co-sponsors, the Weatherhead Institute, the Department of East Asian Languages and Cultures, our wonderful guest speaker, Dr. Guobin Yang, and our faculty partner, Professor Ying Qian from ELAC. This year, as you know, marks the 50th anniversary of the beginning of the Cultural Revolution and the 40th anniversary of its ending. As clearly shown in the film that you saw earlier today, China, the Red Suns, and Professor Yang's great lecture, the 10-year-long Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution profoundly impacted China and Chinese people. The Cultural Revolution also significantly affected the world outside of China, including this very campus. In 1968, as some of you might have noticed from our archival collections here in the library and the online exhibition, Columbia experienced student protests. The campus, and particularly Low Library, was liberated. Some striking students carried banners in that gathering that read, "To rebel is justified," a phrase that you used in English, and in Zhao Fan Yu Li in Chinese characters, mirroring the often used phrase from the Chinese Cultural Revolution. Actually, some Columbia faculty and students traveled to China in the high time of the Cultural Revolution. Professor Andrew Nathan is said to be one. Columbia University Libraries and the Starr East Asian Library in particular holds rich collections in Chinese studies, not only traditional and classical, but also modern and contemporary. Since Jim began as director of this library in 2010, he and his staff have made great efforts in collection development and public service. In 2015, he and Chengzhi worked effectively with Ms. Judy Menton, who will speak soon, to acquire the Cultural Revolution Propaganda Art Collection. This acquisition has greatly enhanced our library collections on this topic. Due to limited exhibition space, only some representative documents and materials are here on display. Through the film screening, this wonderful lecture, and the exhibition, we gather together to better understand the Cultural Revolution. As history is always an important guide to the present, our understanding of this 10-year period better prepares us for what may come in the future. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you so much, Barbara. Next, Professor Eugenia Lin. Let me quickly introduce her to those who don't know her. She is Professor of Chinese History, Director of the Weatherhead East Asian Institute. She has many research topics in late imperial and modern Chinese history, with a particular focus on the history of science and industry, mass media, consumer culture, emotions and gender, as well as law and urban society. She published a very famous book, publication, The Trial of Shi Jianqiao and the Rise of Popular Sympathy in Republican China. That book was awarded 2007 Jiangqi Fairbank Prize. And her next book, Manufacturing Knowledge, Chengzhi Wang, a Chinese man of letters in an age of industrial capitalism. That is a very interesting book to be developed. A third book project she is working on is on China's involvement in shaping 20th century global regimes of intellectual property rights, from trademark infringement to patenting science. She was featured in Top Young Historians History News Network for 2008, and she received the 2013 to 2014 Faculty Mentoring Award for faculty in Columbia's Graduate School of Arts and Science. And she is the director of Weatherhead of East Asian Institute. I mentioned already, but more importantly to this library, she has supported this library tremendously, especially as I mentioned in the case of Professor Yang. She not only came to this library with her students, as well as bringing us librarians to his classroom.
gracious introduction. I'm extremely happy to be here. I'm a modern China historian, so I'm very invested in understanding the Cultural Revolution from an academic perspective. But beyond that, I think we have heard a really wonderful talk by a former colleague of us who we miss dearly, Guobin Yang, about the relevance of the Cultural Revolution for today. Not just in terms of contemporary China, which I think you fielded several very fascinating questions about the relevance for contemporary China, but I think some of the provocative comments that Professor Yang started his talk with in terms of understanding contemporary political violence through the lens of the Cultural Revolution is very useful. It's a very different era of media. It's not, we still have posters, but now it's, and we still have film, but now it's also an era of digital and social media. So media, perhaps Tianying will be talking a little bit more about this as well. I think the new era of media, and actually the new era where there's a surfeit of information is the world we live in, and yet political scripts are being transmitted to mobilize and engender very radical political violence that I think is very much shaping even those of us who live in the safe environments of New York, relatively safe environments of New York. So I felt Professor Yang's talk to be extremely powerful and instructive in understanding how violence can become sacralized and embodied, and can help us understand some of the motives that might be destabilizing our day-to-day. I wanted to briefly also just really kind of thank the library and library directors Jim Cheng and Chengzhi have been just fantastic in terms of supporting Chinese studies, but the East Asian collection more generally. I want to suggest or applaud the entrepreneurism and the innovation. Because I really, whenever I come to Jim's, I'm so happy that we have the money at the Weatherhead to support you, because all the events are always really inspiring and innovative. Today is a perfect example, right? You have a film, you have a wonderful academic talk, and then you have this exhibit. And really coming to the library, I think when you come to Jim's library, it's no longer just a dusty, it's not just a sort of an archive for dusty books, it's actually something that draws you in. And as I said, I just mentioned, we live in an era where there's a surfeit of information. Just turn on your iPad and get any kind of knowledge you want. Yet the university library remains a sacred place. And I think these kinds of events remind us why we want to come into a library and really engage with knowledge through these exhibits, through these programs, through the incredible services that are offered at this library. So I'm really happy to welcome everyone here for this event.
Next one, Professor Andrew Nathan, please. Let me introduce him, although he doesn't need anyone's introduction. Professor Nathan is the class of 1919 Professor of Political Science and Professor of Weatherhead East Asian Institute. Professor Nathan is chair of steering committee of the Institute for the Study of Human Rights and chair of the Morningside Institutional Review Board at Columbia. He served as chair of the Department of Political Science 2003 to 2006, chair of the executive committee of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences 2002 to 2003, and director of the Weatherhead East Asian Institute 1991 to 1996. Off campus, he has lots of positions, especially boards of human rights in China and National Endowment for Democracy, so on and so on. And of course, he has many books, which I don't have to say the titles. You may easily find from the webpage or from anywhere. But I have to mention one thing that probably one of his earliest book I would consider as more bibliography. In this sense, I consider Professor Nathan a librarian of the house. That is Modern China, 1840 to 1972, an introduction to sources and research aids. I quickly would want to mention the story behind that. Is when he visited China in the highest time of Cultural Revolution, he presented this book to the Cultural Revolution leader of China, the post of the person's position is like Minister of Education in later time. And also he was Communist Party Secretary of Tsinghua University. This is a wonderful English language book, was accepted right away. However, the book was returned to him simply because there's an entry of the book listed the title as something including communist bandits. That was considered an insult to not only that person, that leader, but also to, as it was said, the whole Chinese people. So, Professor Matthew, thank you.
Thank you. So I want to join Eugenia in thanking the library for intellectual leadership and not just being a resource or repository, but providing intellectual leadership on the campus. It's great to have a library, Jim Chung, Wang Chengzhi, people who are part of the teaching apparatus of the university. In particular, to take note of the 50th anniversary of the Cultural Revolution is very important because, as you know, as Guobin also said, that this cannot be studied in China, so it's very important that we take notice of it here. And finally, because we're very short on time, I just want to say one other thing. Hi, Joan, I didn't see you. Is to introduce Xu Youyu. I want to point out that he's here, and you guys should meet him. He is a famous Chinese intellectual and a great student of the Cultural Revolution. He's a visiting, I forget what, fellow or professor at the New School downtown, and has been giving a series of lectures on the Cultural Revolution, of which there's still 2 to come. So he's a tremendous resource as well. So thank you again, Jim and Chung.
Because many of us, some of them I know it's first time to the library and do not know our faculty well, so I would like to say some words about them. And now I think Professor Guobin Yang, again, he just gave a wonderful lecture for some students who came later. I want to mention again, he is the Associate Professor of Sociology and Communication at UPenn. And his research areas cover digital media and critical social theory, global communication, social movements, activist media, cultural sociology, and media and politics in China. And this is not an official lecture. I don't know if you want to talk more about this.
I will just say thanks again to Chengzhi, to Dr. Cheng, and to the East Asian Library here, because I spent so much time in the basement, among shelves, and without these resources, my research would be impossible. And I would also want to thank again the great scholars here at the Weatherhead East Asian Institute, Maddie, and at ELAC, and Eugenia, and others. Again, without whose support, my research would not have been possible, and that book would not be there. So I'm very grateful, and I want to thank you very much.
It's indeed our pleasure and honor to support our faculty and students all the time, and even occasionally people researchers from outside. Next, Miss Judy Manton, please. Judy. Judy Manton is a graduate of Teachers College, taught English at the South China University of Technology in Guangzhou, 1980 to 1982. He has taught English teaching methods to village teachers in China 12 summers under the auspices of the Zigen Fund, and teaches a cross-cultural class at Fanny Dickinson University in New Jersey. She has traveled over much of China. This summer was her 30th visit. Ms. Judy Manton, please.
Wang, 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 Shui! Collecting and thus preserving the political art of the masses produced during the Cultural Revolution. As one of the first American visitors to the People's Republic of China, I was also one of the first to begin collecting Mao buttons and other politicized art. Now, after decades of gathering hundreds of items, I have finally found a home for my collection. In 1972, to thank my husband and his Committee for a New China Policy for helping the People's Republic of China obtain a seat in the UN, the Chinese People's Institute for Foreign Affairs invited him to lead a delegation to China. Thus, in 1972, we were inside the Great Hall of the People, shaking hands with Premier Zhou Enlai, while the Cultural Revolution was raging all around us. Chairman Mao had declared, all of our literature and art are for the masses of the people. Thus, inexpensive, social realistic art was flooding the country. Knowing that upon my return to New York as an early visitor to China, Communist China, I would be asked to speak to organizations. I bought some pieces of politicized art to show my audiences. The next year, 1973, found my husband and me again in China, this time as the guests of President Bhutto of Pakistan. So again, I bought the people's politicized art. As I returned to China again and again, my collection grew. Eventually, I bought pieces in antique shops and on carts in dusty back streets, wherever I could find them. And while teaching at the South China Institute of Technology in Guangzhou, 1980 to 82, the professors in my English class unloaded on me some of their no longer wanted Cultural Revolution former treasures. I had collected American political buttons since I was 10 years old, so my eye naturally focused on Mao badges. My husband, while flying home from the Guangzhou Trade Fair one year, spotted a man on the plane wearing the first Mao badge that he'd ever seen. The Romanian gladly traded him his Mao badge for Tom's capitalist Wall Street Journal. And thus my collection of Mao badges began. By 2000, I had a treasure trove of 623 different Mao badges made of lightweight metal, plastic, bamboo, and porcelain. But Doug Reynolds in Atlanta has thousands of them, and they're all cataloged. My favorite stamps and posters pictured Zhou Enlai being welcomed at the Beijing airport by Mao, Chu Da, and Liu Shaoqi. But when the poster was reissued, Liu Shaoqi had been purged and was no longer in the picture. I was able to obtain both posters, one with Liu Shaoqi and the other one in which he is conspicuously missing. I found myself partial to stamps, postcards, and posters of the famous ballet that Nixon had watched, The Red Detachment of Women, as I had also seen it performed. One day in 1980, while I was teaching in Guangzhou, a young man who'd heard about my interest in Cultural Revolution items presented me with his boyhood treasures. The box he lovingly surrendered to me included Mao badges, armbands, and black and white photos of Mao and Zhou. My collection grew and grew. I first displayed it at the Brecht Forum, where our New York chapter of the U.S.-China People's Friendship Association had our office. In 1986, the Asia Society displayed my collection. The China Institute also hosted the exhibit for a short time, as did Medgar Evers College. But when my hair turned white, I decided the time had come to find a better home for my collection. I had an offer from a city in Shandong where they would have created a museum to house my collection. I actually visited 2 designated sites, but my sons insisted that the collection remain in the United States, as they had grown up with it, and they wanted their children to be able to see it someday. So then I consulted friends at the Asia Society and the China Institute, who also advised me to keep the collection in the United States. A couple of prominent Chinese art specialists viewed my collection at my home and verified that it was extensive, of historical significance, and should be kept intact. Right, Joan? Although a couple of universities with prominent Chinese studies programs showed interest, no one followed through. Then one evening last year, elsewhere on this campus, I attended a Tibetan film shown by Professor Robert Garnett. The next morning it occurred to me that Robbie would know who at Columbia might be interested in my collection. All day long, email messages passed around Columbia until they ended up here at the East Asian Library. I emailed over 500 photos of the items to the library, and by the end of the day had an offer for my collection. My head was spinning. I felt validated that my 41 years of collecting these items had not been in vain. And on top of that, Columbia is my alma mater. So I sold the collection to this library and donated some of the money to the U.S.-China People's Friendship Association, but most of it to the Zigan Fund to help support its grassroots development projects in some of the poorest parts of China. I'm the founder and director of their English Teachers Training Program. So, all's well that ends well.
Thank you so much, Judy, for connecting for so long time and agreeing to the acquisition to this library. And I have to say that this acquisition has been supported by leaders of our university libraries, as well as, of course, by Director Jim Chen. Now, the last but not least, my boss, Jim Chen. Well, I have to, well, so many of you know him so well, but I think I should have some formal information for you. That is, he's not only director of this library, but also president of Council on East Asian Libraries 2016 to 2018 of about 100 library membership. Due to his distinctive and innovative contribution in library connections of East Asian films, holding film festivals and symposiums on East Asian films, he was named as one of the 2008 movers and shakers by the U.S. Library Journal, the highest journal of American Library Association. He won the Fulbright Scholar Senior Research Award from the United States Department of State to support his research on an annotated bibliography for Taiwan film studies. which was published this year by Columbia University Press. Before that, he had an annotated bibliography for Chinese film studies published by Hong Kong University Press in 2004. Both bibliographies were, as I was told by so many people, turned out to be so useful, especially to those who study East Asian films, especially Taiwan and the Chinese films. I think there's one small thing related. After the publishing of 2004 bibliography, I wrote a very positive review on this book. Then recently, after he came to be the director of this library, someone said, I know he's going to be my boss. Actually, I don't know, simply because that annotated bibliography is very good, very useful.
Thank you, Chengzhi. First, I want to thank everyone for coming here for this event. And also, I want to say, whatever we have achieved is because we have support from the faculty, students, and the library administration. And especially, I want to give a special thanks to Chengzhi for his instrumental, support for help for this event. He single-handed designed all the contents and curated all these collections. Please take a look after the event. And also, I don't want to keep you longer because it's already 2 hours here. So please have the books, look at the exhibition. We have a wonderful food behind there too. Thank you.
I have to say that even this event, again, is supported so much by Jim as well by my colleagues all behind, even the front desk. Thank you so much.